Hello, everybody. I hope that you are all doing very well. Today, I am here to share a story with you titled Heels. This is a story that I wrote based on a crime in light of Halloween. Thank you to all of those who have sent in your stories. I appreciate all of you. Please support by hitting that subscribe button and by sharing. And I hope that you enjoy this story with me. The heel that held a part of the flesh from his forehead was still hanging there when she set it neatly back into the closet. It matched along the other many heels and stilettos that lined up on the shelf. Her closet was a killer closet that so many girls dreamed and longed for. But she had worked hard for her life, and no one would take it away. A guy like Jimmy would always be a follower. He went where the crowd led, and he was never a good enough guy to be a leader. It was good that she got rid of him. Turning on the faucet in her bathroom, she washed away the blood that stained the white basin, and she watched it swirl around and down the drain. When she looked in the mirror, she saw the drips of blood that had covered her face, making her look like a serial killer. Wait, she was a serial killer. She laughed, a sound that echoed off the walls of the room. And after she laughed, the tears came down her cheeks, and then she reached up and wiped the blood, smearing it across her face. Now, she whispered, can you see how brave What the fuck happened here? Detective Steve Shong said as he pulled white gloves from behind his pockets to put on. Steve was your average Joe, somewhere between 5'5" to 5'7", always a hair short or a hair longer, but never quite above or below either. He blamed the wife's cooking for the midsection that was beginning to look like a tire, and the 4 kids born back to back was what caused his early onset of crow's feet. But somehow Steve couldn't imagine living without either of that, so he settled to just be happy. He had been working on the New York police force for 12 years, and 2 years ago, finally made detective. Something he had been really hoping for since he joined the force. Detective, an officer on site said as he saluted him. Looks a mess. The guy didn't stand a chance. No weapon was found that would have made such detailed holes like that in the body. Steve walked into the house on the corner of the street where lights were flashing. For a man, the house seemed too warm, almost feminine. He was sure at one point this guy was married, and through the ugly divorce got the house. Inside there were blood splatters all over the wall, the floor, the window curtains that held faded yellow flowers, and even the stair railings. The house smelled of murder and of sex, no doubt about it. As Steve walked in, the body lay on the couch, naked as the day he was born, showing everything from head to toe, and covered in tiny holes that seemed to fit a rice grain. Some holes were jagged twice, and some were left twisted with flesh still inside. One of his eyes were completely punctured in, and his nose, or what was left of his nose, was hanging half off. It was grisly. Well, the officer asked, what kind of weapon do you think did this? Steve whistled low and planted his hands on his hips. Officer Doug, there's only one weapon that could do this kind of damage. And what is that? A woman's heel. I know. I'm married to someone who wears the same type. Those are deadly weapons. Officer Doug, with his sandy blonde hair, whose face was now paled, shook his head as they heard footsteps walking into the house. Steve looked up to find a woman standing about 5 feet tall, wearing gray slacks and a white button-down shirt. She had her dark hair braided down her back, but her eyes were fierce. Hey, doll, you might want to cover up your eyes. You don't look old enough to see this kind of scene, Steve said. She smirked and removed her badge to show him. On it, it said FBI, and Steve's smile disappeared. Shit, Doug whispered behind him. She smiled. I assure you that I've seen more than enough of these types of crime scenes, Detective. How about we start over where you brief me on what you know? Steve cleared his throat. Yeah, she crossed her arms. Brenda Lee, FBI. I wasn't aware that the FBI was going to be working this case. As far as I know, this is my scene. Yes, it was your scene. Until you managed to let the last two cases similar to this one slip out of your fingers, Detective. So when you do sloppy work like that, I'm called in to clean up your mess. And right now, a desk full of paperwork is waiting for you if you should screw up again. So I would choose my words wisely if I were you. Steve walked to her, eyebrows raised. Now, wait a minute here. I didn't threaten your presence here. I am welcoming you as long as you respect me. You didn't threaten me? Did you not just tell me that this was your scene and that I was uninvited? That was not a threat, Steve yelled. I was merely stating the obvious. Detective, the obvious is that you've no idea what is going on here, and that you've forgotten to watch where you step because you've just ruined evidence. Steve looked down and saw that he was standing, indeed, on a bloodstain. Shit, he said as he moved aside as he heard her walking out. What a fucking bitch. She's actually the best on the FBI, Doug said. I admire her. Why do I have to work with her? Steve asked as he sat in his office, while his chief looked at him with dreary eyes. His chief, Mallory Stone, was just as hard-headed as the FBI agent, so he was sure the two had already argued enough as it was. Mallory was divorced with 2 daughters who she protected against all odds. She wasn't a very tall woman, but what she lacked in height, she made up in voice. Because I'm asking you to, and the Bureau is breathing down my fucking back. You do realize that this is either a copycat or a serial? This is the 3rd case that looks like this, and we've got nothing. The public wants answers. We can't provide that. Now, go wash your hands and play nice with the lady from the FBI, because if you don't, it's my ass on the line, and trust me, I can sit on you with this ass, even if I am a foot shorter than you. Steve rolled his eyes. Yes, ma'am. Mallory opened the door, and Brenda walked in with a smile on her face. His chief walked out, shutting the door, and Steve stared at the woman before him. There was literally no room for her to sit, so he simply just waved his hand. Make yourself at home. Thanks, she said as she shoved a pile of paper onto the floor and took a corner of the desk. I appreciate it. Whatever. Tell me what you know. Oh, no, Detective. I thought I'd let you do the honors. All right. Medical examiner just faxed me some information from earlier. The damage was done by a shoe heel, as I suspected. 35 holes, to be exact, and some were double-punctured wounds. Didn't you have the same MO from a case about a month ago that you're still trying to solve? She asked. Steve nodded. Yes, but it's gone cold. We don't have any leads. Victim is male, right? Same age, same lifestyle? Yes. Did you interview his ex-wife? Brenda asked. Steve smiled. Ex-wives. The guy had 3. All 3 had solid alibis. We hit a corner. Whoever did this went silent for a month, and now she has striked again. How do you know it's a woman? Brenda asked with inquisitive eyes. Steve laughed. Well, isn't it obvious? I mean, the guy has heel punctured all over his body. It's clear it's from a woman. It's a crime of passion, textbook stuff. Right, she said, nodding her head, because textbook stuff says that when the guy's face or genitals is blown off, it means it's got to be a love-hate thing. But what if it wasn't a woman? What if it was a man? Are you saying he's gay? She shrugged. Who knows in this age, right? I mean, you can't rule that out. Steve smiled as the door opened and Mallory walked in with a sheet of paper. From the medical examiner, there were a mixture of semen and cum, and a hair follicle was pulled out from the liquid. It was tested and it came back with results of it coming from a woman. Brenna sighed. I rest my case. The air was balmy for a September night, and as Steve made the final walk to the front door of his home, he heard his name being called. He turned around and faced the dark of the city. He could hear tires screeching from the street opposite his house. The eeriness of the night made his skin crawl as he turned and found a shadow sitting on his front doorsteps. He stopped and watched as it moved, and then he saw it retract its feet and hands into the dark corner of his door. He began to shake and stepped back, hearing his name being called again. He tripped over his own feet and landed on his back, the night sky staring at him. And then a face, a dark black face, full of holes, looped down and stared at him, wearing a blonde wig. He screamed as the mouth opened and black liquid began to pour onto him. Steve! The sound of his wife's voice jerked him awake. He was in bed, the sheets twisted between his legs and his wife beside him. He reached over and turned on the lamp. His wife, Gina, was watching him with her doe-like eyes and innocent face. Her long black hair spilled over her shoulders as she pulled the blankets to cover her thin shoulders. What's wrong? She asked. He rubbed his eyes. Nothing, just a nightmare. God, it felt so real. What kind of nightmare? He couldn't talk about it with her. He got out of bed and then pulled on his pants. Go back to sleep. I'm gonna go for a run. Now? Are you crazy? It's 4 a.m. He didn't listen as he bent down to kiss her forehead and left. Running was his way to remove all the bad energy from his body, all the bad memories, all the bad thoughts. But today he felt as if the more he ran, the harder it felt to breathe. His mind was going against him. He stopped to catch his breath. The world was still asleep, and here he was, running and trying to clear his mind, trying to forgive himself. He heard a can clatter in the dark, and he turned toward the alley where it came from. It was dark, and as he walked closer, he heard a gagging sound. He didn't have his gun, or any weapon for that matter. He picked up what looked like a pipe sink on the ground. Hello? Who is it? He shouted. This is Detective Steve. Who is it? The gagging got louder and louder, and as he turned the corner, met with a man covered completely in hose, gagging for life. Blood was pouring from his open wounds as Steve dropped the pipe and ran to him. It was dark, but he knew the warm liquid covering his hands was blood. Hey, slow down. You'll be okay? You're gonna be okay. I'm gonna get you help. Hold on. As he turned to go, he saw a lighter flick, and the blue flame stared at him in the face, and then something knocked him out cold. Steve woke to the sound of a saw drilling and liquid dripping around him. The stale smell of beer stung his nose. He groaned, and when he turned around, saw a body lying beside him. He recognized it as the same body he tried to help earlier. When he looked up, he could see the shadow of someone on the other side of the curtain. Trying to make as little noise as possible, Steve pushed himself to a standing position, and when he tried to walk, the chain made a loud thud against the wall. The drilling stopped, and he turned to find the shadow on the other side of the room was gone. He took in a deep breath and slowly sat back down when he felt something behind him. As he turned around, the man who had been lying was propped up sitting beside him now, his eyes half out of his sockets, and his lips torn into a permanent grin on his face.
Isn't he pretty?
A voice disguised asked. Steve swallowed hard and pushed himself away from the body that had been propped up. He could see the shadow moving about on the other side again. It looked like a man wearing a hood. He could see drills being tossed about.
He wasn't very nice, you know. All I did was help him grin.
Who are you? Steve asked. The hooded man laughed.
Typical cop question. Who am I? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? Fucking stupid law.
Okay, then why don't you ask the question and I'll answer. He threw a dagger that nailed the wall beside Steve. It left him fighting for his breath.
You know, I could have aimed 2 inches to the left, and you'd be dead just like your buddy there.
He's not my buddy.
Really? Why don't you look closer?
Steve turned and looked at the man beside him again. The hair was a sanding blonde, but he could no longer recognize the face. He looked lower and saw the tattooed ring on the finger. There was only one man he knew of that had that. Shit! Doug, Steve whispered.
Bingo. You're not that dumb for a cop. I'd hate to kill you, but as the saying goes, leave nothing behind. You're the first I'll be sorry to kill.
Wait. Don't. I'm sure you don't want to go down than to be known as the killer who was stabbing people with heels. I mean, that's kind of a sorry weapon to use, isn't it?
No. It gets the job done fast and quick. Plus, I get to watch you bleed to death. There's nothing wrong with that.
But why? Why are you targeting all these men? What have they done to you?
Think, Steve. Think real hard. Wasn't there something you did way back then that you could never forget? The one thing that you still have a hard time forgiving yourself for.
Thoughts entered Steve's mind as he dug deep into his memory. Nothing came to mind, and he began to breathe faster than normal.
Let me give you a hint. It involved a pair of heels and a young girl with a blonde wig.
And immediately, like magic, the memory came floating back to Steve's mind. Oh, yes. Middle school. Halloween. When the group of boys Steve hung out with chased a girl wearing a Marilyn Monroe costume down the alley. They were all booing her because she wasn't exactly the type to pass the part as the iconic figure. They'd seen her walking down the hallways of the school. She was a loner. She was a nerd. She was somebody they all picked on. Did Steve like it? No. But he didn't do anything about it either. And while she defended herself using her heels to shoo them away, the boys had thrown balloons filled with red paint at her and called her names. And then one of them grabbed her wig and put it on, pretending to parade down the alley. And when the girl tried to run, two grabbed the heels she'd left on the ground and began beating her back with it. After that, they'd left her there to bleed to death. Steve began to cry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I was young. I was stupid. Didn't you ever do anything stupid when you were young?
Sure I did, but not like you. And today you will feel the pain of my suffering. Because not only did I suffer from you, I also endured beatings from my mother because she said it was my own fault for being tortured. She said I deserved it because I wasn't brave enough. But today I'm going to show my mother just how brave I am.
Steve watched as a shadow came from around the corner, and when the hood was removed, his eyes opened wide at who was looking at him. What a fucking mess, Mallory said as she stared at the crime scene before her. Her gut was hurting from the sight of it. Standing beside her was Brenda, who was looking sick to her stomach. Out of all the scenes they'd had so far, this was the worst in its presentation. Under the decapitated limbs and fingers lay Detective Steve Shong, brutally murdered and severed. His eyes were gouged out with the same weapons as previous murders, and his tongue was protruding from his lips. Shame. I was beginning to like him, Brenda said. What do you want me to do now? You've got to release the press to the public. They're waiting for an answer. Mallory turned to her and took a deep breath. I want you to take front. You take the case and you figure out what is going on. Whoever it is, capture her and make her fry. I'm counting on you. Brenda nodded. You got it. Another heel added to the collection on the top shelf that contained another piece of flesh. It was the final one, the last one that had hurt her. Now her collection was complete, and she could finally put the past behind her. As she rounded the corner of the bedroom, the light from the sun caught the shining badge that lay on her dresser as she closed the door on her heel collection. Thank you for tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed this story. I'll see you in the next episode.